You know, for 1,500 years, there's been this one game that's acted like a mirror to, well, to us, to human civilization. It's reflected our ideas about war, about power, about politics, and even what it means to be smart. We're about to dive into the incredible story of chess. So, how on earth did we get here? How did a war game cooked up in the Gupta Empire end up as a proxy battle in the Cold War, and eventually the ultimate proving ground for artificial intelligence? That's the journey we're going to trace, from ancient courts all the way to the silicon mines that have, let's be honest, now completely surpassed us. All right, so let's start at the beginning. And our story doesn't begin in some quiet, cozy study. Nope, it starts on the battlefield. We're talking 6th century India, where a game came about not just for fun, but as a serious military simulation for kings and their generals. It was called Chaturanga. And that name, it's the key to everything. It literally means 4 divisions, which perfectly mapped onto the 4 main branches of the Gupta Empire's army. See, this wasn't an abstract game. It was basically a tabletop war. And when I say it was a tabletop war, I mean it was literal. Every single piece was a stand-in for a real unit. You had the Raja, that's your king. The Ashwa was the cavalry, which, you guessed it, became our knight. The Gaja, or war elephant, is the ancestor of our bishop. And then there's the Mantri, the king's top advisor, the predecessor to the queen we know today. But here's the crazy part. This original game, it was so much slower. That Mantri, the piece that would become the all-powerful queen, was actually one of the weakest pieces on the board. It could only move a single square diagonally. And the elephant, it had this weird 2-square jump. It made for a game of slow, grinding strategy, nothing like the blitz attacks we see now. So the game starts to travel, right? It makes its way to Persia, gets a new name, Shatranj, and it gives us maybe the most iconic phrase in any board game, ever. When Persian players trapped the enemy king, they'd declare Shah Mat, which means the king is helpless. Sound familiar? Yep, that's the direct root of our word checkmate. From the Islamic world, the game just explodes. It goes everywhere. But here's the thing. It didn't stay the same. As it spread east into Asia and west into Europe, every culture that touched it reshaped it, tweaked it, and made it their own, creating these totally distinct versions of the game. And you can see these changes so clearly. In the Islamic world, for instance, rules against depicting living figures meant the pieces became these beautiful, abstract shapes. Then you hop over to China, where their version, Shangyi, is played on the intersections of the lines, not the squares, and there's a river in the middle of the board. And in Japanese shogi, they introduced this wild drop rule where you can literally drop captured pieces back onto the board as your own. Wild. Meanwhile, back in medieval Europe, oh man, it was just total chaos. There were no standard rules. Different regions had their own esses, or local rule sets. Just imagine trying to play like this. In some places, the king could just leap out of danger on its first move. In Germany, you could make a triple move with your king, queen, and a pawn all at the same time. It was a total mess. But all this chaos, it was building to something. It was leading to the single most important moment in the history of chess. Around the year 1500, in Renaissance Spain, the whole game was about to be turned upside down by just one piece. And here she is, the weak little counselor, the Furzin that could only limp 1 square diagonally, was reborn. The new queen could now rocket across the board in any direction, as far as she wanted. She went from being one of the weakest pieces to, hands down, the most powerful piece in the game. A total game changer. And it wasn't just the queen who got a major upgrade. At the same time, that clunky old elephant, the alfil, with its weird little 2-square hop, was also let off the leash. It became the modern bishop we know and love, a long-range sniper that can slice across the entire board. These 2 changes completely rewrote the playbook. I mean, this was such a huge deal that the French had a nickname for it, Mad Queen's Chess. Suddenly, the game was way faster, way more tactical, and a whole lot more violent. A lot of historians think this change was directly inspired by the rise of incredibly powerful queens at the time, like Isabella I of Castile. The game was, once again, mirroring the world it lived in. So, once the rules kind of settled down, chess makes a big move itself. It moves out of the royal courts and into the public eye. It starts to become this serious intellectual sport, first in the coffee houses of Europe, and later a symbol of national pride and political ideology. And the first guy to really change how people thought about the game was this French master, François-André Philidor. He's the one who famously said, "The pawns are the soul of chess." And that was a radical idea. The notion that these little foot soldiers actually controlled the whole strategic flow of the game. That was the birth of real chess theory. This set up this amazing clash of styles in the 1800s. On one side, you had the Romantics. They saw chess as art, all about brilliant, swashbuckling attacks and heroic sacrifices. For them, how you won was just as important as winning itself. But then came the scientific players, led by Wilhelm Steinitz. They saw chess as a science, a game about slowly building up small advantages and then crushing your opponent's weaknesses without mercy. Then, politics enters the arena in a huge way. After the Russian Revolution, the brand new Soviet Union grabs onto chess and turns it into an ideological weapon. To them, it was a game of pure intellect, and if they could dominate it, they could prove the superiority of the socialist system. They poured a ton of state resources into creating what was basically an unstoppable chess machine. And how successful were they? Well, this one number tells the whole story. In 1945, the USSR challenged the USA to a match played over the radio. The result? It wasn't just a loss, it was a demolition. The Soviet team absolutely crushed the Americans, 15.5 to 4.5. That match kicked off 50 years of almost complete Soviet domination of the chess world. So for all this time, for centuries, the greatest enemy sat right across the board from you. They were human. But then, in the late 20th century, a brand new opponent showed up, one that wasn't made of flesh and blood, but of silicon and code. And the way AI plays chess is just as fascinating as the game's human history. You start with IBM's Deep Blue back in '97. It beat the world champion Garry Kasparov with pure brute force math, just crunching 200 million moves every single second. But 20 years later, a total paradigm shift. Google's AlphaZero didn't need humans to teach it. It just played against itself for 4 hours. And in that time, it taught itself to become the strongest chess-playing entity in the history of the world. Which brings us right back to our big question. For 1,500 years, this game has been a reflection of us, our wars, our societies, our intellect. But now that we've been surpassed by the very machines we created, the game has entered a completely new chapter. What is it going to tell us about ourselves in the centuries to come?